This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
What's up?
Hey, what's going on?
Just off every Friday till the end of the year.
That's sweet. I feel like this week's been, I don't know, I kept thinking it was like Wednesday. I've just been off all week because of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Sure, you guys had some pretty big traffic to handle. Did everything go well?
Yeah, we used Rails auto scale. So
Nice.
Everything went fine.
Cool. Yeah, that's good. We had some traffic, but not near like you guys do. So it was pretty easy on my end, just answering emails and questions and whatever the whole weekend. But yeah, I imagine your scale goes up pretty crazy over the holiday. Like Shopify did. Well, actually, did you see that graph of Shopify that was like their Black Friday traffic last year has been basically all of 2020 since the pandemic started? It's equal to that. And then Black Friday was even above that. I was like, dang. So I imagine that you guys, anybody building a platform like that helps people sell products just goes through the roof over the weekend.
Yeah, especially like we have our email usage, the number of emails we sent was absurd compared to the last few years. Because not only did more people buy online because of the pandemic, but like Podia is growing. And so like the number we have each year, each Black Friday and Cyber Monday gets a little crazier.
That's so awesome. Yeah, that's a really fun time of year. Brooke was joking the other day about before she met me, it was like Thanksgiving and stuff is a time to go hang out with family and friends. And now she met me, it's like Thanksgiving weekend is a time to sit and refresh Stripe and PayPal dashboards all weekend and see what's happening. Because if anybody isn't familiar and has their own product, you do some discounts on that weekend and you can easily double or triple like your regular monthly revenue, which is huge. So it's a really good time for small business and stuff. I mean, people were doing some pretty crazy big discounts this year, 50% off or more. And I don't think that's a good thing, but you don't want people to end up feeling like Udemy or something. Or like when you order pizza, you're like dumb if you order pizza without a coupon code. So you don't want your like products to be diluted like that. But I do that every year, just mostly to give back to people. If you can't afford it, here's your time to go buy it. So it's nice to hopefully give back and help people.
Cool.
What's new in the Ruby on Rails world?
Ruby on Rails world. So RC2 is out.
Yeah. Are you guys using that yet?
I don't think so. So we're on RC1. So
in production?
We're close.
Nice.
Yeah, one of my coworkers is working on that. I don't know where it's at, but yeah.
I tested Jumpstart Pro and stuff against RC1, but I haven't shipped it because it basically would be pushing all the customers to RC1, which wouldn't be something I want to do. But yeah, I haven't had any issues with it. Like the more recent releases have been adding new features, not really changing any foundational things, which is good. So It seems like an easier upgrade of the recent major versions.
Something's wrong with RC in maybe something with the version of Ruby I'm using. But whenever I do like a Rails new, I get like a ton of app path warnings. So for the Students Reflex course, like I've been Rails newing every 3 seconds. And so I have to be like Rails _ 6.0.3.4 new. I don't really want to litter the console with a bunch of errors, but
yeah, it's distracting or whatever. So
it's distracting for me.
Yeah.
Something's wrong. Oh no, nothing's wrong. Oh crap. What was I doing?
Yeah. How's the course going?
I feel like it's going well. I feel like I suck at doing this, but I listened. Adam Wathan had is it Wathan or Wathan?
I think it's Wathan.
Interesting. Anyway, Adam had a full stack radio episode talking about all his screencasting tips. And it was like the perfect timing for me. So I listened to that and picked up some tips about I've been recording. And when I screw up, I just stop, put my hands up, take a breath, and then say what I wanted to say again.
Mm-hmm.
So that I can just go back and try and edit it to where it feels like one video. I haven't been able to get it right in one take, and it feels like a waste of time to try and do that. To start at 7 minutes in and be like, oh, I need to go back to the beginning. Unless I like royally screw up, which has happened a few times. But
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly the process I do. I actually stop recording and start the recording again instead of just like going back and editing, because I've noticed that I'll miss stuff more likely if I have to go back and edit one giant clip. So if I just know the beginning of this clip is good, then I can look at the ending of the previous clip and say, okay, that ended just before I like mumbled something, and I need to go edit 5-10 seconds off of that. And that's worked out fairly well for me. So I don't have to spend too much time trying to find those edit moments. But I think too, you can either leave a long pause and it makes it easier to notice those, or like do a clap or something loud so that you see that in the audio somewhere. And the audio is kind of a nice way to analyze that. You can get your clapper out, do it like the movies, man.
I had one of those as a kid. Yeah, I'm off today. So I've spent the whole day just recording videos. Like I sat down and like things that I'm just not aware of. I'm so aware of when I'm recording. My neighbors had their leaf company across the street, and I was like, this is the worst time. And then like my kids, they run throughout my house all day, and I just zone out because I'm just usually so in programming that, yeah, it's not a thing. But then like my kids like screaming, and it's like all I hear. I'm like, the mic's picking that up. So it's a completely different world. It's not that I ever thought it would be easy. There's just a lot more nuance to it than I anticipated.
Yeah, the biggest thing is you're now listening to your own voice and all these things that you're not used to, and they all seem to be screaming at you. And you're like, this is stuff that I could happily ignore before, and now it's front and center, and it really is a different experience. So I just opened Twitter, and Nate Hopkins was tweeting about whatever the new magic, as DHH has been calling it. DHH replied and said, I believe that day is today. We just haven't fully internalized it yet. So I don't know if that means the new stuff is coming out, because Stimulus JS version 2 got released today. So maybe it's going to be a big day in the Rails world.
I'm looking at that now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That'd be cool. I mean, this is, in theory, a lot of the stuff that we've been waiting on that fixes things like the Turbolinks, Android and iOS, and the form errors have been the biggest pain point of Turbolinks for me, which is, it's great for navigating on GET requests, but you can't submit a form and render errors properly. You got to go build that yourself from scratch, and it doesn't come with the Rails scaffolds, which seems really strange. And they changed that in Rails. The default scaffolds are not local as true anymore, or whatever. So that is a good sign. DHH said something about that, where it doesn't need any of that stuff server side anymore, which is pretty cool. So seems like we're going to get some good stuff. He's also been talking about, did you see the discussion of effectively not using a bundler at all, like Webpacker, and trying to get rid of that?
That's the thread that Nate was on, like this module stuff. My mind can't even, I don't know. My mind can't comprehend that, because it's just the world we're used to. But I saw DHH tweet yesterday or this morning. I get my days confused like you, but he said he like linked to Can I Use, and it was ES6. It was like 94, 96% of browsers support ES6. And it was like, oh.
Yeah, pretty crazy, right? Things have been moving in the browser world, and we just know we have to use Webpack or whatever, and that'll take care of the compatibility. But the browsers have made some big progress forward. So yeah, he was talking about like, Stimulus is under 10 kilobytes. You don't need to do anything with that. Like, just, it is fine. It's plenty small. And if you're writing Stimulus controllers, they're generally tiny. So I thought that was interesting, but he had a long discussion with Evan Yu on Twitter as well, the creator of Vue.js, and they were going back and forth on like, it's good in theory, but also not quite doable yet, was what Evan was saying. And it probably depends on what you're doing as well. DHH is not using Vue, not using React, like using Stimulus and New Magic, which I don't know if it's the new TurboLinks because he keeps calling it New Magic and not referencing TurboLinks anymore. So I don't know if it's more than that or what the change there is going to be. But
didn't we say we'd refer to it as just Turbo?
Yeah, well, that was what it was called in the gem file. It had a private repo on Basecamp/Turbo. So maybe it's just Turbo now. But
I did see somebody roll into DHH's tweets earlier and be like, yo, what about Alpine? And he was like, no, that's not for me. That's cool, but...
Yeah, I think that makes sense because it is a lot trickier to organize your logic in Alpine because it's all in the HTML. And if you're using Tailwind, you've got a lot of attributes now. And yeah, that's a little much. So I do agree. I like the pulling the logic out into the controllers. And for anybody who hasn't seen Stimulus 2 yet, basically it's Stimulus 1 with the new CSS and CSS classes and values APIs. And they've changed a couple little things. But for the most part, I went and upgraded the Tailwind CSS Stimulus components library and Jumpstart Pro to that already today. And there's no breaking changes. There's a deprecation warning for data targets. You now, instead of saying data target and putting the controller dot target name, you actually say data controller name target equals target
That's a
name.
good change because
I do too.
The way we use the data API in it, where you can say like this.data.get or this.data.set, when you're like setting it in the HTML, you're saying data controller name, then the value, like the attribute name. It's in line with that. And I didn't realize how much I disliked the .10 syntax until I saw the replacement for it.
Yeah, it makes sense. But in an interesting way, should the actions also be that way too? Because data controller name action could remove that from the action syntax as well. I wondered if that's also inconsistent and needs to be migrated at some point too, or whatever. It's hard to like do all that naming. It trips me up every single time. Sometimes it's hyphenated, sometimes it's camel case, sometimes it's underscored, and it's just annoying. So
totally.
But the new value stuff is really nice. I mean, I say new, it's been in a PR for like 2 years. So people have pulled that down and used that fork or whatever. But so if you have a value or something that you would use, they have an example of a dynamically loaded div. You can set a data attribute that has your value, like your URL. And then you can go into the values hash or JSON object or a object in your controller and say URL is a string. And that way it'll be casting integers or Booleans and all that for you. So you don't have to do that yourself, which in the Tailwind controllers we built, it's been a pain because you're like, okay, grab this and then parse it to an integer. And if it doesn't exist, use this default value. And it's quite a rigmarole to go do that. So it's nice to have that built in. I think that'll be a really nice improvement. But it didn't look like they have default values for like a number or a string, but they're always like 0 or empty string. And I don't know if you can specify custom default values. You may have to override the getter is maybe what they want you to do. Is like do it yourself. But I thought that was interesting.
One of my favorite things I saw along the value stuff was that they have callbacks. So you can hook into this value changed. And I think that's going to be a really like key piece in orchestrating applications where you could essentially just be like dataset.something.equals. That's going to change. And then you can you have a method that hooks into that. You're not going to have to like necessarily, because I do a lot of custom JavaScript events. And then you have listeners that respond to those events that are passed. And I could probably see myself cutting those down, not completely, but a fair amount.
That'll be huge because you could change that URL and then trigger it to go reload the page or whatever. And it would eliminate your custom event there entirely and then just change a value. And it starts to look a lot more like a Vue or React app where you have a data store. And instead of a JavaScript object, you're just editing the HTML. And so that becomes the source of truth, which is really easy for you to interact with on the Rails side of things because you can just generate that HTML and send it over. And it's just really nice. And this would be great to hook into Cable Ready or something. So you could just say, change this data attribute on this element, and your stimulus controller can go do whatever it needs to do to refresh that. That'll be kind of cool to see how that connects together. I'm excited about this. And the CSS classes, I think, will be phenomenal because you can go and define those classes, which for what I was building, like the drop downs, tabs, modals, all that sort of thing, you're just like messing with classes constantly. And you got to pass the classes in as data attributes and say, well, when the modal's open, go remove this class from here and add it to this target or whatever. And this is going to really make that a lot easier to work with, especially when you really want to do good Tailwind UI stuff with animations. Then this will be way simpler, it sounds like. So I'm excited to go and refactor those components to use some of those things instead, because that was one of the big things that, was left up to you. It was definitely doable before, but now it's a lot more organized. So if you have a search bar or something as their example, you would be able to toggle like the loading state so that you could add that class in really easily and say like it's currently searching and change that when it's complete and so on. So that'll be a really nice improvement.
Yeah. When you were talking about passing data attributes in and stuff, like with classes, all I could think of was how savage I am. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to put that class name like in the JavaScript. I just don't care. So I am really excited to replace that with these class attributes. It seems like a lot of just little quality of life improvements that are going to have a big impact.
Yeah, I agree. And I know some people are disappointed with it because it's like, well, this is the stuff that you told us about 2 years ago and nothing new. But DHH talked about this, that they thought they would use stimulus more when building Hey, and they haven't. So they're really happy with it as is, which is why it's basically that's all you need in the, I don't even know if I want to call it a framework, but it is kind of a framework. It's just organizing a few things for you and helping you with the mutation observer API so you don't have to. But yeah, it is like a very tiny framework.
Yeah. I'm really like, I don't know how to describe it, but like yesterday I was literally, I joke about being excited, but I was really excited when they're like, we're going to release Stimulus 2 tomorrow. I don't know. I'm so excited to see this Hey stuff. It's weird. Like I legitimately like have emotions about all of this. Real emotion.
Yeah, I think there's a pain point with all this stuff that it addresses, that the Rails core features aren't really, they're not addressing big pain points anymore, because Rails core, it has pretty much everything I ever want. There's very few times where I'm like, oh man, I really wish Rails had this feature, or this is a real pain in the butt. That is true. Need to merge device. But JavaScript is still the biggest pain point. So it seems good. Nick Janidakis replied to DHH about the new magic. And he said that it will involve Rails specific backend code, which I thought DHH talked about that wasn't the case. And then Nick asked, to get it to work with other web frameworks, will this server-side code be more or less than TurboLinks 5? Or is it deeply specific to Rails? And DHA said, it's substantially more, but nothing other full stack frameworks can't copy if they have built-in solutions for WebSockets and job queues. So it sounds an awful lot like a Cable Ready or a TurboLinks and Stimulus Reflex blend or something. I really am curious now, because my impression before, it was more client side and there wasn't going to be any back end stuff, but maybe there is. which it makes sense because I know that there's frames involved, right? So there's kind of pieces of the page can be re-rendered, more like maybe a PJAX from GitHub back in the day. So maybe it's something more like that, kind of like the stimulus reflex mounting to a subcomponent in your page as the root or whatever. I don't know. It's interesting.
It's interesting because I get the idea that it's going to basically be like stimulus reflex. But when asked about it like 6 months ago, DHH was like, no, it's not like stimulus reflex.
Yeah. And I don't know if that is because stimulus reflex is trying to run HTTP requests through the regular Rails stack, but over WebSockets. And I think this is more like rendering partials back and forth or something. Like that's the impression I'm getting. Like
it's a little lighter weight.
Yeah. And this is something that I've been dealing with for the past day. Actually, I have, like Basecamp, a middleware in Rack for stripping out the account ID at the beginning of the URL. But the problem with that is that WebSockets and Stimulus Reflex just run right directly to the Rails router. So if you have an account ID in the URL, Rails will handle that fine because it runs through the middleware stack, and my code can run and pull that out. And you can set the script name to that ID, and then Rails doesn't know that exists. And it can then basically use the routes from the rest of that URL. And you send that through Stimulus Reflex and it's naive. And so it just goes and takes the full URL, doesn't run it through middleware, and that doesn't match a real Rails route anymore. And I was trying to figure out a solution for that without having to go into Stimulus Reflex and build your own middleware processing, because then it ends up being a configuration thing that Stimulus Reflex is like its own separate deal that you got to go configure itself. And I really wanted them to be the same. So it's more intuitive and like works out of the box as you expect. And a really interesting thing is that if you have this middleware that looks for an integer at the beginning of your URL, it can ignore the routes like /about that don't have it. And so /cable works out of the box, but you can also put /1/cable in there. So action cable doesn't care whether or not that ID is in there because the cable route goes to the Rails router and then gets mounted to that route as a rack app there. So I was actually looking deep into the Rails router that I've never looked into before and trying to figure out if I can pull out that script name in the action cable server and then cache it so that we could set that in the fake request that Stimulus Reflex does. Because right now, Stimulus Reflex, well, effectively, it just sets the script name as just an empty string and forces it that way. So I was like, if we could pull that out, because we're already doing that in the regular middleware, and in theory, it should already be saved for action cable, we could cache it and then just include that and then use an empty string as default if that wasn't set. But I spent a few hours and I don't know where to find that. So I'm not entirely sure on the solution for that. I need to learn the Rails router some more, but you can access the request that the action cable route was on and get all of that info, which is kind of cool, but it didn't include the script name. So I don't know if Rack is not passing that along or whatever, or Rails strips it at some point. I noticed that your Rails engines do the same thing. So if you mount your Rails engine, like the pay gem, you can mount it to /pay or whatever, and it will actually modify the script name for the Rails engine so that when you're doing an isolated namespace gem, that's how it knows the route is /pay. And it keeps track of that. And I was like, oh, that makes sense now. Never looked into all this code, but I knew how to interact with it, but I never thought about how it worked behind the scenes. So it's been fun to dumpster dive and look through some of this code and see how it works.
I want to know, going back to what you said about DHH said, if they have built-in solution for WebSockets and job queues, how do queues play into this?
Well, I mean, all the action cable stuff has been broadcast stuff in a background job. So I'm wondering if,
Oh, is that how it works?
yeah, if you look at the chat examples and stuff, they'll render the chat message, but they'll actually do that in like a background job. So it doesn't delay your request. If you submit a message, it'll do the rendering in a background job. So I'm wondering if that's how it's wired up. It will just create lots of background jobs and have them run. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see, because I kind of speculated early on if they were going to use HTTP2 and do push or something, but he was tweeting about that the other day and was like, push isn't the answer. And so I don't think that's going to be it. Sounds like it's WebSockets and job queues. So it's going to be very similar to a cable ready, I'm guessing. I don't know.
I have no idea.
I'm really looking forward to this. They seem very happy with it. And I've always been impressed with, they call it conceptual compression, which I love, but they always have such a clear end result that you interact with as a developer. I really appreciate their thought that goes into it, and rarely feels messy to interact with Rails code. It's always very thoughtful, like Stimulus. It feels so intuitive when you pick it up and you're like, I just don't have to worry about any of these things anymore. And I know intuitively how to wire everything up. They do a good job of that. So I'm hoping that this is another lesson in good programming, like API design.
We'll see. I'm ready for it. Kind of. I got to finish my course before I'm ready for anything. But
yeah, you're like in this existential crisis of, I promised I was going to do this course. I got to finish that. And hopefully this doesn't make it outdated.
Yeah.
So
when I saw him tweet that, got to get back to writing documentation, I'm like, take your time. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. You just file bug reports as soon as it comes out. And you're like, this is broken. Get back to work. I'm going to finish my course now.
Yeah. I haven't really had much else that's been very exciting for me, Ruby wise. I haven't really done anything interesting.
Yeah. I guess not exactly Ruby totally, but a lot of Ruby was involved. But I've been working on the custom process support, like a proc file for Hatchbox. And you'll be able to go in, and because a proc file isn't going to work, because I need you to tell me which server you want this process to run on, because it could run on any of them. And I'm not spinning up a node for each individual thing like you do with Heroku. So I've just been building an interface for you to define those, and you write your command, and then we'll go and set up a systemd service so that it's restarted if it crashes and all that stuff. But they want you to specify a executable full path to Rails or Ruby or whatever. And if you're using RBM, you can go to the shims directory, and that's fine. But what if you're going to run a command that isn't something like that? And I want to be able to support that too. So I ended up having to build a exec script in Bash that I'll upload. It will load RBM and all these things and configure your environment. And then it will run the command that you gave it. So in theory, you can run all your Rails stuff, but you could also just run like another Bash script or whatever. Like, it shouldn't care, was my goal. And that's been quite a fun thing to figure out, because there's so many weird nuances to all that. But I got it working. So now in Hatchbox, you define it. We'll go upload and generate this service and install it and start it up for you. And then I've been having a lot of fun of rebuilding the horrible action cable code to stream the logs. The code was like, it all worked, but it was just disorganized and stuff. And this was all before Cable Ready. So seeing Cable Ready and how they do it is now way, way clearer. And I can just drop that in and say, here's some text, go look for this on the page and insert it. And if it's not on the page, just ignore it, because frankly, if you're not looking at this page, we don't care. So whatever. And it's been nice to be able to go back and see, wow, I did that all kind of messily. And it's embarrassing because I have some of this. This was written before Webpacker 2 originally. So I have some old CoffeeScript files in the asset pipeline for Action Cable. Then I at some point converted all the CoffeeScript for the like Bootstrap and other things to regular JS in the asset pipeline. And then at another point, I had added Webpacker. So I have some Vue.js stuff in Webpacker and the rest of it's in the asset pipeline, a mixture of CoffeeScript and JavaScript. And it's just kind of become a mess. So it's going to be really fun to go back and refactor all that, hopefully use the new stimulus. I really kind of want to get rid of the Vue components. They were useful for a while, but seeing how easy it is to like insert a partial or whatever with cable ready, now I'm like, why would I use Vue for this? And it was also one of the more complicated pieces of the app. So being able to just do all that in stimulus and leave it up to Rails to render these pieces is needed. I'll have a lot more control over it, and it'll also be in the same thing that I'm used to everywhere else, Ruby and stimulus. Because Vue has been kind of a big context switch to jump between. So that'll be another improvement to make as I go. But there's been a feature I've wanted to build for, 2 years. It's one of those Stimulus 2.0 projects. Like ready to go release it, but it's going to take 2 years for it to actually come out.
Are you using Cable Ready for that? Or did you like build kind of your own version of Cable Ready?
Yeah, I pretty much built my own version of it ahead of time. I hadn't abstracted out the generic append and morph and those commands. I had just written those. If you send me over a key that's like, this is the status update or this is logs or whatever, they each know that like status updates should replace a div with new HTML. And then logs are like, go append this into this div. And effectively, each one of those is a different Cable Ready command, but it's all specific to the feature. And so I ended up almost building Cable Ready. And then when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. I've already almost done that, but now it's reusable. Of course, that's a great way to do it. It was one of those times where I really like, and I think this is why people struggle learning design patterns. If you go and build something and discover a design pattern, you're going to actually understand the design pattern, why it's useful, what the downsides are. But if you go learn the design pattern first, you're not going to really grasp it until you've used it probably quite a few times and realize the edges of its value. And it's really fun to do stuff like this where you're like, wow, I realized that I'm looking for metaprogramming and I didn't know that was the name and whatever. And you discover it and you're like, this is so cool because now I really appreciate it. And I also understand why it's needed or whatever. That was kind of that moment that I had when Cable Ready came out. And I was like, oh, this is genius.
Yeah. You and I have talked about, I don't know if we've talked about it on here, but I think I guess a lot of stuff depends on the Hey technology, but like Cable Ready is so clutch to me and it just keeps getting better. They added support recently to be able to like insert things into local storage over Cable Ready and do desktop notifications at work. In a project we're on, we use the ability just to fire custom events because there's like certain things that Cable Ready can't do understandably, but as long as we can just broadcast to the client some kind of event on the document or event even on a specific div, that we can hook in that and do whatever we need. And it's been really nice if you pair that with stimulus, where if you have, I'm just making up an example here, but if you have a list of things and each one of those has a controller, an item controller, and you want to fire a custom event to do some kind of modification, you can just in that stimulus controller one time define on connect, listen for this event, and then make a change. And then from Cable Ready, be like, okay, go find this div with this ID and fire this event. There's no state involved. There's very clear like boundaries. I don't know. It's really good. I like it.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of that. And I think it ends up being very direct, which state and re-rendering and stuff is very much the opposite, where it's, yeah, you go change the state and something magically watches this and decides how to re-render everything. And hopefully it will be in the right state. But you have to just kind of assume that things are going to be working correctly for that. Whereas this is a nice way just to say, look, I want to go append this to the page. And that's exactly what the code is going to say it's going to do. It's going to go append it to this place. And if that's not the page that the user is currently looking at, who cares? Throw it away. That's fine. And I really like that because if you're using GitHub as an example, a new comment and a pull request, if you're not looking at the pull request, who cares? It can still send you the message if you're on the repo. And then you insert it if that thing exists. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. Whatever. You don't have to worry too much about those things. And I think that makes it a lot easier to wrap your head around when you look at the code. So yeah, I've really liked that approach for building Hatchbox, which has quite a few of those little things of like a deployment notification. Again, that's another one where like it could have used a cable ready event to do a generic notification, but I send over basically the JSON object that I passed to notification just like cable ready does, but I built it from scratch. And it only works for app deployments. It's not a generic method in my JavaScript, but it could have been. And now going forward, I will probably be pulling out each of those things and just replacing them with cable ready because it fits so well. So that'll be good.
Totally.
Yeah. Have you been following along the Ruby Advent calendar?
I have not. Like I've seen the tweets, but I haven't actually had the time to go in and look at it.
Yeah. It'll be good once they're all published. I wrote 3 of them. So it pretty much filled up really quick once, very close to the beginning of this. So it was last minute, but it just filled up right away. So far it's been Matt Swanson did one on local time, which huge favorite of mine. That library is undervalued and underused, I think. Elastic Enterprise Search is interesting. I haven't read that one yet, but it says workplace search, app search, and site search all together. So that'll be interesting. It looks like it's written by somebody who works at Elastic. So that will be wonderful. That library, I know that they use heavily Elasticsearch at maybe Basecamp too. I know they were tweeting about it. You remember the old days of using like Solar or Sphinx or whatever? There was like
PG search it.
Yeah, PG search is so easy now. And I always use PG search because I don't want to maintain Elasticsearch and another service until there's a project where you really need it, like a Basecamp. You're going to really want to do that. But that complexity is quite a bit. There's a lot to worry about with that, especially if you're trying to do a multi-tenancy or something, separate index for each customer. And yeah, a lot of stuff. Mark Colbruge did Blazor, another Andrew Kane amazing library. Mine came out today on Noticed. That was fun. I did one on Access Tenant and Pay as well. So
cool.
And Pay did I tell you about this? Emerged in the Paddle support. So now you can do subscriptions and one-time payments with Paddle.
That's cool.
That's going to be a good one for anybody that lives in the EU and has to deal with VAT and European taxes and stuff. So that one's good. I'm trying to implement that into Jumpstart Pro so that it's another option you can enable. It'd be kind of cool. So that's it. Jason Sweats is tomorrow, day 5, and got 20 more after that. So it'll be fun to follow through all those and see what people have posted. And if you want to cheat, you can cheat by looking at the drafts folder in the repo because it's either a Jekyll or Bridgetown site. So it's pretty simple.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Any other good things to share before we go?
Man, I can't think. It's been a weird week. It's kind of been a short week because I didn't really work on Monday, Cyber Monday. So it's been a simple week, but I'm really just excited for stuff to finally be moving in Rails again. Like new stuff coming out that we're excited about, not just like maintenance things or like multi-database support is great, but it's also not going to change our lives. Whereas new magic hopefully will. So fingers crossed that drops today or something. That would be amazing.
Yeah, we'll see. So
cool. Well, yeah, it sounds like Andrew had a bit of a panic at work, so he wasn't able to join us, but he should be back next week. So I guess we will talk to you then.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
See ya.